can you get shredded by walking? If yes, is it the best way? Is it even a good way? Are the answers to those questions the same for everyone? Let's start from the start. In order to lose fat and get very lean, we must maintain a calorie deficit for as long as it takes to reach desired leanness. Another way of phrasing that is saying we must maintain a negative energy balance, or more simply, we need to expend more calories than we consume. Now, of course, you can create that deficit simply by eating very little. However, most of us don't really enjoy starving very much. Starving can be accurately described as a considerably less than ideal situation. Therefore, this whole getting shredded business usually involves some form of activity with the sole purpose of burning calories. Which brings us to the question, what do? Should we swim, ride a bike, run, take up extreme pogo stick? Or could we get away with something much easier, like walking? You see, the problem with actual cardio is that it's actually hard, and as humans, we usually veer towards the easiest option. So, in theory, since walking burns calories, we need to burn calories in order to create the calorie deficit and get shredded. And so, technically, we could just use walking as our sole means of burning calories and get shredded doing it. Now, of course, you will also be lifting because most people want to have some kind of muscle under there, and you'll be going about your daily tasks, which will burn some calories. So, aside from that, you could do no other cardio or purposeful calorie burning activity and still technically get shredded. But the question isn't really could you, it's should you, and that depends. You see, the problem with walking to burn calories is that in order to burn the same amount you could in a more intense, say 30-minute cardio session, you're gonna have to do a lot of it. Let's take a look at how much. The average UK male walking at the average walking speed on a flat surface for 1 hour will burn about 320 calories. The average UK male weighs around 83.5 kilograms and walks at 3.5 miles per hour, by the way. Sorry about the metric and imperial crossover there. Now that sounds alright, doesn't it? 1 hour walking, 300 calories knocked off, that's pretty decent. But the thing is, most people aren't the average man. And when you look at the difference that body weight makes, it's actually quite significant. A 130 pound person would need to walk for about an hour and a half to burn the same number of calories. A 205 pound person could burn those calories in around 50 minutes. That's almost half the time that it took the 130 pound person. Although the heavier person will generally have a bigger appetite, these two would likely nail a Mars bar in roughly the same amount of time. But the time required to burn it off through walking would be vastly different. And here we're just talking loosely about total body weight. We're not actually considering body composition, but we probably should. With muscle being more metabolically active than fat, it stands to reason that a 200 pound person who is 10% body fat could burn more calories than a 200 pound person who is 20% body fat, even doing the exact same activity. This is generally why people with more muscle mass find it easier to stay lean. So what does all this mean? It means that walking is a more appropriate way to lose fat for some people than it is for others. Take popular fitness YouTuber Mike Thurston. He's a big chunk of muscle, some grade A prime cut dense lean meat, right? Mike probably burns about 20 calories just getting out of bed in the morning because he's shifting around all this muscle. Now, unless you're really out of shape, walking at a comfortable speed is pretty much going to feel the same for everyone. It's going to feel pretty close to effortless for Mike, and it's going to feel pretty close to effortless for somebody who's the same height but 50 pounds lighter. Ask them both to run 5k and there's probably going to be more of a difference between how each person feels. But walking is pretty much just walking for everybody, and that's really the key thing to think about. Or let's say the two key things: how difficult it feels for the individual and how productive it is for burning calories. So let's compare a few different scenarios. First, a large muscular individual versus somebody tall and skinny. Let's say they both take an hour walk at an average pace. It's going to feel pretty easy for both of them, but it's going to burn a lot more calories for the muscular person. Now put them both on a treadmill at a steady pace for 25 minutes. Again, it's going to burn more calories for the larger, more muscular person. Actually, everything always will. But this time, it's also probably going to feel much more difficult for them than it would for the tall, skinny dude who might be better suited to running. And so the ratio of perceived difficulty to calorie expenditure has altered, and it's now shifted more in favor of the tall, skinny guy. as in this activity is probably better suited to him as a means of burning fat. So what about somebody really fat and out of shape? Well, of course they would burn more calories running than walking, but their perceived difficulty might actually be so high for that activity that they're not really capable of running, and walking for them will still burn enough calories to make it quite a productive method of fat loss. So let's just answer those questions from the start. Can you get shredded by walking? Yes, if you already have a good amount of muscle mass, or if you're able to dedicate a lot of time to it. Is it the best way? Actually, in some circumstances, probably. If you follow a very high intensity and high frequency training program, and you carry enough muscle mass to make it a relatively productive means of burning calories, then walking might be the best option, since the low impact and low intensity nature of it won't risk interfering whatsoever with your recovery. Or if you're quite out of shape and you find other ways of burning calories too difficult, walking may also be the best way. Is it even a good way? For those people mentioned above, it's a very good way. For most people of average weight and body composition, it's okay, particularly when incorporated alongside other activities. For smaller, lighter people or those without much muscle mass or body fat, it's not a particularly good choice. Are those answers the same for everyone? Well, we already answered all that. Categorically, no. Side note, I'm going to talk about walking in terms of steps per day, so I should mention tracking those steps. Most phones these days have an inbuilt pedometer. Be careful how you say that or it'll sound like a device for ranking paedophiles. But obviously they rely on you having your phone on you at all times. There are also a lot of smart watches that track your steps, which might be a little more accurate. Or you could go old school and buy an actual pedometer, then keep that on you at all times. But that's a bit weird, to be honest, isn't it? It's like having a pager or something. Finally, you don't actually have to track your steps. Given that you'll probably maintain a pretty consistent walking pace, you could just track your time spent walking. Now, you're not going to track the time it takes to get up from your desk and walk to the toilet, so you would just track your additional walking time. So that time that you are dedicating to walking beyond your usual daily movements. And if you really wanted to convert that to steps, you could just count the number of steps you do in a minute and then multiply that by the number of minutes you spend walking. So one last question then. If we decide to do some walking, how much should we do? Typically people like to throw 10,000 steps per day around, probably in truth just because it's a nice round figure and it's probably just manageable for most people. Beyond that, it's really pretty arbitrary. A brisk walk is about 100 steps per minute, which means it would take you 100 minutes or 1 hour and 40 minutes to complete your 10,000 steps. But you'd probably do a few thousand of those just generally moving around, so it might be more like an hour and 15 minutes or so of dedicated walking time. That seems fairly reasonable, I think, particularly if you split that up. You could do half an hour in the morning, 15 minutes at lunch, and half an hour in the evening. But really, there is no set amount you should do. The answer is however much you have to do to make a difference. And if you're one of the people who would have to do a lot of walking before it made a significant impact, then maybe just don't do much at all. Just spend your time on a more productive activity. Alright, finally, before we go, I just wanted to share some tips on getting your step count up. So, I think for me, probably the most helpful thing and the most important tip I can share with you is walk more. Helps, man. Helps a lot. See you later.
Jordy Lenny is my hero.